on their Wednesday issue of the National Post. And it's really something I would even recommend to the madrasa teachers, to the Islamic school, and even to the parents. Actually, to look at it, share it with your children, let them be informed about the history of what happened in the Middle East 60 years ago. Because it is important to look at the roots of the problems which we are facing now in that part of the world, where the Muslims are basically facing. Let me just very quickly go through two passages of that. In the beginning, he begins with an incident which was witnessed by a person who was only 12 years old. He says, 60 years ago, a 12-year-old boy witnessed the slaughter of his family. His name was Fahim Zaidan, and he lived in the Arab village of Deir Yassin in Mandate, Palestine, which was under the British mandate at that time, which was attacked on April 9, 1948 by Irgun and Stern gang troops. This is paramilitary forces allied with the right wing of the Zionist movement. These troops swooped into the village, started machine gunning civilians. Those that survived this initial attack were then forced by the troops to gather outside the village. They took us out one after the other, Zaidan recalled. Shot an old man, and when one of his daughters cried, she was shot too. Then they called my brother Muhammad and shot him in front of us. And when my mother yelled, bending over him, carrying my little sister Hudra in her hands, still breastfeeding her, they shot her too. Irgun commander Ben Zion Cohen offered a more succinct account of what happened. And then he quotes him, "We eliminated every Arab that came our way." This statement glosses over the fact that some of the Arab women were raped by the gangs before they were killed. At least 93 civilians in the village were murdered that day, not just women and children, but also babies. Deir Yassin was a fact. Deir Yassin was in fact a microcosm of what happened in Palestine as a whole in 1948. Zionist troops used terror tactics to force the indigenous population to flee. Israel was founded through an act of ethnic cleansing, a type all too familiar in recent history. This is where, we have to look at, and we are surprised at the statement of the Prime Minister of Canada, where he is trying to equate any kind of criticism of the State of Israel with criticizing Jewish people. These are two different issues. And saying that any attack on Israel, for example, is attack on Canada. The two different countries. There are many, many different kinds of people who live in Canada, have different political views on this issue. But let me end with this interesting piece by this individual in the middle of the article, where he says, if you look at Zionism from the Western perspective, its logic is clear and compelling. Anti-Semitism has deep roots in European history, and the Holocaust demonstrated what happens to Jews when they don't have the protective shield of their own state. The guilt for the Holocaust belongs not just to the Germans, who were the primary perpetrators, but also their many collaborators in Poland, Ukraine, France, and elsewhere. Basically, he says, Western civilization committed terrible crimes in the 1930s and 1940s, and the West owes the Jews a state. This is the Western perspective about Zionism. But then he says, but if you look at Zionism from a global perspective, one that acknowledges that Arabs are human beings, then the morality becomes much murkier. Unlike the people of Europe, the Palestinians weren't direct participants in the Holocaust. Why should Palestinians lose their land because of crimes committed by Germans, Poles, Ukrainians, and other Europeans? It is difficult to look at the founding of Israel, the displacement of the indigenous population, and the ongoing occupation, and not conclude that the Palestinians are paying a huge price for other people's sin. And these are not my words. it is there in the National Post, and I think it's important for us to be more informed about these issues so that when the discussion goes on in other circles that you might interact with them, you know how to respond on the basis of the truth of what happened in the Middle East 62, almost 100 years ago. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the wisdom, the courage to always be with the Mazloom and to oppose the Zalimeen at all times and at all places. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين صلوات عليك اللهم صل على أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله عليه وعلى سيدة نساء العالمين وبضعة خاتم النبيين سيدتنا فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلوات الله عليها وعلى سيد شباب أهل الجنة الحسن المجتبى والحسين الشهيد بكربلاء عليهم الصلاة والسلام والأئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان ماحي أصار البدء والطغيان هادم أمنية الشرك والنفاق حاسد فوق البغي والشقاق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آبائه الكرام ما اتصلت الليالي والأيام. اللهم عجل فرج وسهل مخرجه واكحل ناظرنا بنظرة منا إليه واجعلنا من المستشهدين بين يديه وافتح له فتحا يسيرا وانصره نصرا عزيزا. اللهم أظهر له دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة عهد من الخلق. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.